I don't really know Eric personally, but I have been a member of the Olympics LA Coalition, and I think it's a really important effort that touches on many of the issues we're concerned about, including militarism, police repression, gentrification, and displacement. I'll leave it to Eric to really talk about his own personal involvement in that and the perspective of the coalition. So why don't you just take it away, Eric?
Thank you, everyone, for letting me share this space with you all. I really appreciate it. Just want to let you know some accessibility things. There will be some dogs barking. My neighbor just got a new dog. He's really loud. There might be a cat. I have a couple cats jump in front of me, just to give you a heads up. It makes it a little more fun, a little more interactive. So just so you know. I'm really excited for this. My name is Eric Shevrin, he, him, his pronouns. Member of NOlympics LA primarily, do a lot with them. I came to this work actually sort of recently, in the less than 6 months probably. I've been a professional musician for a while. For the last probably 5 years or so, I moved to LA from the northern suburbs of Chicago, but I consider Los Angeles my home, my city now, and I really love it here. Since touring is no more, and the prospect of music and live music is really, we don't really know at this point. I don't know, I've really devoted my life to social justice causes and to NOlympics, really, because it in many ways encapsulates so many fights: surveillance, gentrification, houselessness, police militarization, so many things. And my background a little bit, I'm Jewish. I was raised the Jewish faith, and with a very strong focus on social justice. And my mom, who's a civil rights and employment lawyer, told me, I remember from a very young age, she just said the most important thing to do is to help people. And actually, that's one of the first things I remember from when I was a kid. So it's been giving me this opportunity thanks for giving me this opportunity to do this and to present. Once you hear some of the things about the Olympics and mega events, it's hard not to look at them the same way. You know, you all probably know some of these things, but once you kind of hear the nitty gritty about them, I think you'll sort of know where we're coming from. Cool. So I'm just gonna get right to it. Thanks again. Okay, here we go. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so who we are. NOlympics LA was started in 2017 by the Housing and Homelessness Committee of the LA chapter of the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. The coalition includes more than 25 groups right now within LA and California. And we work regularly with opposition groups across the US and around the world. Black Lives Matter LA, CCED, the Crenshaw Subway Coalition, DSA, Ground Game LA, Iraq Veterans Against the War, K-Town for All, LA Can, and many, many more. Our entire list is on NOlympics.com/coalition. So yeah, we have a lot of coalition partners, and we're growing that coalition all the time. We categorically oppose the prospect of an LA Olympics. We refuse to measure success in terms of profit. NOlympics LA is not a reform group. We are non-reformists. We're an opposition group. We do not want the 2028 Olympics to happen. And I will be referring to it sometimes as LA 28. That's what the Olympics are officially called. That's their name here, LA 28. the question people ask, they say, you know, they are coming, so how can we make them better? It's an inevitability, so what can we do to reform them? No, we oppose that outright. They aren't necessarily coming. Just because they've approved them and city council rubber stamped them doesn't mean that they are coming. This is not certain at all. We believe that we can stop them. We ask, you know, why take all the harm and some of the benefits? Why not invest that money, which is, you know, $7 billion into public housing? Why not take that money, $7 billion, to fight houselessness? Take that money and, you know, build infrastructure, invest into communities, into schooling. The Olympics will harm all of these things and all of these people. You know, the House of Reps a couple weeks ago actually passed this sort of sweeping legislation. It's sort of this reformist Olympic legislation a couple weeks ago that would give more power to athletes and force more oversight of the coaches. And you know, we saw this and just sort of scoffed. A lot of the reforms in this bill are already in place, and it's just pure PR. So they do this all the time, and we sort of don't even take note of it because it won't do anything. We believe. Excuse me. So the inevitable consequences of a good Olympics: gentrification and displacement, police militarization and increased criminalization, labor exploitation, diversion of resources, erosion of democracy, and environmental degradation. I'm just going to go through just a little on each one, and then we're going to go into more of that a little bit later. But so gentrification and displacement, it's already happening, which is what we like to bring up a lot in the Olympics. Is that just because, you know, LA 28 is pretty far away, but there's already so much of the bad outcomes and these things are already happening from the Olympics. And so in Englewood right now, SoFi Stadium just debuted a couple months ago, about a month ago, which was the, you know, $5 billion most expensive stadium in the world. And people are already being displaced because of that stadium in Englewood. There's communities that have been there for so long. One of the last, you know, thriving Black enclaves in LA, and rents are, you know, going up by, you know, 80% in some areas near the stadium. We had an action at Englewood a couple months ago supporting a apartment complex that is being just violently displaced. We support the Lenox Englewood Tenants Union, which is a newer tenants union that just has come up, and we do a lot of work with them, uplifting them. You know, according to the Center on Housing Rights and Eviction, about 2 million people have been displaced since the late 80s because of the Olympics. Just think about that. 2 million people have been displaced because of the Olympics. It's a lot. And then police militarization and increased criminalization. So LA 28 has said they need about 3,000 more police to put on a secure and good Olympics. 1984 is when the LAPD got tanks. That was because of the 84 Olympics. It's always an excuse for police militarization. It's always a rationalization for it. It's a justification for it. Operation Hammer was a few years after the Olympics, but the mechanisms were put in place because of the 84 Olympics, the sweeping nature of the police brutality. You know, mass arrests of young Black youth and Latinx youth. You know, 28,000 youth were just put in jail indiscriminately with gang injunctions. Then labor exploitation. All the Olympic volunteers are unpaid. Most of these jobs are temporary, extremely low wage. Diversion of resources is enormous. They can be used for housing, for healthcare, for education. There's an erosion of democracy that's also enormous. You know, the way that LA 28 was achieved was rubber stamped through city council. They didn't even know what the budget was going to be before they approved the games. And there will be a off-the-record rules in spaces near Olympic venues that always harm Black and brown and indigenous unhoused bodies that are created by the police and local municipalities that, you know, during the games, they create sort of a state of exception because they're sort of they're such, you know, they need to be secured events. So these spaces become undemocratic because in the name of security, always, always. And then lastly, environmental degradation is just immense for these games. For the Rio game, you know, for example, 28,000, almost 29,000 athletes and staff were carried by planes to Rio, and then tens of thousands of spectators, or, you know, and then hundreds of thousands. The duration of the games, almost 4 million tons of carbon dioxide were emitted. It's kind of a figure it's almost hard to comprehend. And then 17,000 tons of waste were produced, 6,000 tons of food. It was like, you know, 50,000 tons of fuel, almost 30,000 gigawatts of, it's numbers that are like astronomically enormous to put on these games. That what they do is they say they'll be green. They kind of slap on that green label that we all know, you know, that neoliberal capitalism has now. It's like, oh, it's green, but it's immense waste. So, yeah. The long-term goals of NOlympics are to stop the LA 2028 Olympic Games, to fight for a better Los Angeles, organizing around the idea of the right to the city, and to influence media narratives and public perception of the Olympics. So that's what we're trying to do. And they are in no particular order, which is actually very important in these, because these are all very, very important to us. We believe we're doing these very well. And yeah. Our short-term priorities.
What?
In order but not mutually exclusive, are building a base of popular resistance to the Olympics.
I have a
Sorry, do you mind? I think someone's
for the
not on mute here.
makeup, and I can't see it.
Maggie, could you please mute your mute button, please?
Cool, thanks. Building a base of popular resistance to the Olympics and their effects, which means developing and sustaining projects that address material issues facing vulnerable communities. Focus on supporting existing efforts and organizations, organizing with rather than strictly for members of these communities, and on building leadership and organizing capacity within these communities. So as I was saying before, like LIT2, Lenox Inglewood Tenants Union, is a newer tenants union that's really strong, that was formed in Inglewood largely in response to SoFi Stadium and the Clippers Arena, so to stadium displacement that's happening in Lenox Inglewood area. Inglewood and Mayor Butts and the city council are just unbelievably corrupt, and they have greenlit the stadium and allowed it to happen in conjunction with real estate developers. And it's just been devastating on the community that tenants are coming together to fight it. And we are uplifting them and working with them in whatever they need. And that's very important to us because it fits, you know, it's very important. And because they are facing these issues that are directly related to the Olympics. Education, building awareness, and developing analysis, which is communicating information and fostering discussion about issues associated with the Olympics and what we identify as the root causes of these issues, emphasizing that these underlying issues cannot be addressed through reform. So we have, you know, really sprawling website with just a ton of analysis that we're very proud of, and that you can check out NOlympicsLA.com. There's really just a deep dive of analysis on there, videos and articles and podcasts, and just it's really just a massive amount of political education. We have Pick a Side LA, which is a website we just made that says you cannot be on the side of defunding the police and pro Black Lives Matter while also being in favor of the Olympics. We have extensive social media. We have a USC partnership developing. Teddy's on the phone with us, which is wonderful. We partner with UCLA, get cops off campuses, Service Not Sweeps Coalition. So yeah, and then strengthening and growing the coalition. So we support coalition partners, projects, and identify ways for all our partners to engage and enrich NOlympics specific work whenever possible, build meaningful relationships with organizations across LA County, expand our geographic reach internationally, and continue to grow and formalize transnational coalition, supporting existing allies and newly formed groups. So we have coalition partners in, all across the world, and we actually have a transnational meetings every Monday, and we have teach-ins, Korea, Paris, Italy, London, Hamburg. So we have allies all across the world who have had Olympic experiences, and we have these teach-ins, which we're actually archiving right now and going to put together. It's really important to us to have those relationships because the Olympics are a global problem. So we learn from them, the comrades from across the world. So who wins and who loses? The title of this presentation. The Olympics are a rigged, elite-driven game designed to benefit people who are already rich and extremely powerful, and to disenfranchise pretty much everyone else, no matter the commercial or financial outcomes of the games. They don't care. They do not care how much they make, if the games make money, or anything like that. As a rule of thumb, the more unearned power a person or institution holds, the more they will gain from the games. The more marginalized a person is, the more likely they are to be violently dispossessed. This is always true for every games. The more you look into it, and the more you learn, and the more you analyze literally every single Olympic Games, you realize that they exist to launder the elite lifestyle of a few very rich people. Yeah. So who wins? Politicians win. And we're going to get into more detail about this in a bit. Nationalists and white supremacists win. Real estate developers win. The police win. Private security firms win. The military wins. Corporate sponsors and their advertisers win. The IOC and NOCs win. So that's the IOC is the International Organizing Committee, and the NOC is the National Organizing Committees of the Olympics. And those are private institutions. Foundations and nonprofits, they definitely win. Those are the winners of the Olympics. They always win, whether that's power or money, clout, land, they're the winners. Who loses? Poor people, people of color, indigenous people, renters and tenants, workers, unhoused people, sex workers, small business owners and street vendors, immigrants, transit riders and planners, people with disabilities, taxpayers, and athletes. So the Olympics, they create this pretext and incentive and sort of this rough timeline for these winners, which is essentially the ruling class, to revitalize, to bring back and cleanse host cities at the expense of everyone else. The word cleanse is literally used many times. So a clean city, we can go through this. Like, you could say, what does this actually mean? We can analyze it. A clean city actually means no conflicts with corporate sponsors, with Delta Airlines, with Coca-Cola, with Dow Chemical, with Coca-Cola, with Airbnb. A clean city is marketable to global real estate investors and speculators. It's appealing to people, who are richer, who are always whiter, younger, highly educated, and more able-bodied. It's clean city is no visible poverty or political dissent. No visible poverty meaning sweeping, houseless people from areas where there usually are many. Let's get going. So from the who wins sections, politicians. So being associated with a bid, it can help ambitions for higher office. So like Garcetti, Mitt Romney, Theresa May. Garcetti, one of the first things he said he did when he got to office was get the Olympics. And he said he actually, it's not verified, but he may have had Joe Biden help him pretty up to date. And if you look at Rio, you look at London, you look at most cities, politicians really want to get the games. It's one of the first things that they tend to do because it's a very quick, easy way, well, not necessarily easy, but just to raise their profiles at the expense of everyone else. So it builds a relationship with the donor base outside of their city through just the sheer number of the contracts the Olympics will necessitate. And it provides a line item on their resume if the bid and or the games are successful. So it incentivizes them to create this clean city for the cameras. The housing market in Salt Lake City crashed in 2002, and it increases their donor base as well. Politicians absolutely win from this. Who wins? The IOC and the NOCs, the National Olympic Committees. Being a member of the IOC is an incredibly lucrative position. Scott Blackman, who was the disgraced former chair of the U.S. Organizing Committee, made $1.3 million. He actually was overseeing the committee when there was the Larry Nassar abuse scandal. And that's when Larry Nassar, the team doctor, abused the gymnasts. And he was given a $2.4 million settlement a bonus package as when he was fired from the USOC. And they didn't even make him say why he left. He was it was like an honorable discharge from the USOC. He was given $2.4 million as a disgraced executive. That's how just a side note, how the Olympic Committee sees abuse just in general. 2.4 million, wasn't even made to say why he left officially. So the IOC members receive almost $1,000 a day for attending the games. And many of them parlay their voting power during the host city selection process to secure bribes during the games. They get perks during the Olympics. They get their own lane when they're in host cities. They usually demand their own freeway lane. And their members usually leverage their roles and national pride to shield themselves from political and legal consequences, AKA they're extremely corrupt, and they always have been. And Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC, just yesterday was given the Seoul Peace Prize Award, and he himself won $200,000 personally for that, with no intentions of giving it away to charity or maybe a nonprofit. He just won $200,000. Real estate developers. When boosters say that hosting the Olympics puts a city on the map, which has been said for 30 years. Actually, I think the '84 Olympics were one of the first Olympics for people to start saying, we're going to put this on the map. Reagan loved to say it. Peter Uberoff used to love, I'm sure some people maybe who were at the games remember it. We're going to put LA on the map. So they always said that. What they really mean for is global real estate speculators and put on the map for them. So in addition to creating this timeline for speculation, the Olympics provide pretexts to displace, dispossess poor residents from areas targeted for gentrification. Absolutely intentional, absolutely connected. So through raising rents, ramped up policing, and rationale to demolish low-income housing and communities for Olympics-related buildings, hotels, stadiums, infrastructure, transit, as well as the enclosure of public land. Indeed, the LA Times reported that the 2018 tax revenue from the 300-acre stadium construction site was used to hire more police officers and replace the aging fleet of cop cars, as well as for this vague purpose of restoring services and that was for SoFi Stadium. So the justification for when people were pushing back on SoFi Stadium and Inglewood being built, they were saying that, oh, no, don't worry, the money that we're going to get from this is going to be used to help with police, to just get more police cars and go back into the police state. Imagine the fuck you to the community in that one. Wild. The police, the military, and private security firms, they win immensely, maybe the most. Who knows? I mean, it's hard to tell. The largest line item in the Olympic budgets is typically for security. It's estimated that for LA28, they're going to get around, I mean, this is assumed, we're going to stop it, but about $2 billion in, sorry, there's a cat. Local police often receive huge budget increases around the games, usually for high-tech weapons, militarized. No, I'm sorry. They usually use the Olympics as a pretext for more aggressive, very violent policing, and to normalize new or more extreme practices that might otherwise raise concerns. Anti-riot drills, facial recognition in Tokyo's, snipers in London's. Private security firms are often recipients of private contracts negotiated by very ambitious politicians. So for LA28, Trump and Chad Wolf, who I'm sure everyone knows, Chad Wolf, DHS, they talked with Casey Wasserman, the chair of LA28, the sports agent, the grandson of Lou Wasserman, friend of Jeffrey Epstein, Casey Wasserman. They signed the contract and they immediately started talking about security. Trump started talking about cleaning the streets of unhoused people, or the homeless, as he calls them. They started talking about how it's going to be the most secure games ever, how Chad Wolf is going to give them the most money and how they're going to help the most, and it's going to be secure. So it's usually talked immediately about security. So the Olympics, it can be argued, are they even about sports anymore? Or are they just sort of a vehicle for the, militaries of these countries just to kind of like showcase themselves? And then, sorry, one more thing here. Who wins? Nationalists and white supremacists. In the words of Hamid Khan of Stop LAPD Spying, who is an ally of ours, and we just had an event Wednesday with BLM LA, and Dr. Moulin Abdullah and Hamid Khan spoke about how you can't support defunding the police and support the Olympics. It's wonderful. Hamid Khan, who's just such an amazing speaker and organizer, said, and I remembered this, I wrote this down, the Olympics are a 4-year reminder of white supremacy, which I thought was so apt and so true. So the contemporary aesthetics and format of the Olympic Games is built off the model set forth by Adolf Hitler. The parade of nations and prominence of national leaders during the opening ceremony, showcasing urban development as a display of national strength and much more. Contemporary nationalists and white supremacists love the Olympics, and they use them to bolster and normalize ideals of national, Western, and white supremacy. Nigel Farage is a right-wing English PM. This is a white supremacist in England. I apologize. I need to double check who that is exactly. I apologize for that. So don't fact check me on that one quite yet. So the Olympics, as we know, in 1936, there were the Nazi games where the IOC did a let's trust him attitude with Adolf Hitler, when Adolf Hitler said that he would take down the swastikas in Berlin. He did not. And they have proven over and over again that they are racist, and that it's a vehicle for the sort of domination of indigenous, Black, and brown bodies. So they definitely win. Corporate sponsors and advertisers. Oh, they win indeed. Wow. Brands and companies that sponsor the games essentially have a monopoly on all businesses that take place during the games. They determine what is sold. They determine what advertised. They determine all of that within the host city. They're stated beneficiaries of the clean city provision in the host city contract, another PR buzzword. The profit margins are completely divorced from the financial outcomes of the Olympics themselves. They negotiate these contracts right before then, so they're just like, we don't care. Like, it doesn't matter to us for afterwards. So, for example, in 2016 Rio Games, they set a record profit for NBC compared to the other Olympics broadcasts, while Rio itself is still reeling financially, reeling in so many ways. Similarly, their reputation, the brand equity, they don't suffer if the games go under or they go poorly. It doesn't matter to them. It doesn't matter to Delta or to Coke or to Dow or to NBC. Their brands are untarnished, no matter what happens to all the people there. It doesn't matter. Just a little fun side note that for the London 2012 games, all of the volunteers were outfitted by McDonald's. No one knew this though, and that McDonald's wrote the handbook on how the volunteers should carry themselves, and that it was replicated from the McDonald's Corporation handbook and etiquette, and people took great issue with that. So we're essentially replicating this corporate McDonald's mindset into all these unpaid volunteers. So it's sort of a vehicle. McDonald's gets free propaganda into all these, tens of thousands of volunteers. Who wins? Foundations and nonprofits. An extremely rare event that an Olympic Games does not go massively over budget, very rare, and sees a small surplus. For example, LA 84, they're always talking about that, that surplus. That money is mandated for the host city contract to go to the general benefit of sport, i.e. not to the host city itself. So when Garcetti talks about, oh, the Olympics made a profit, bullshit, it didn't go to the city. So who is that profit for? In 84, the 90 million of the surplus that LA got to keep went to a private LA 84 foundation, which was led by Paul Zifrin, chair of the 84 bid and organizing committee, relative of Casey Wasserman, all connected. The IOC is also technically a nonprofit institution and an NGO. So it's designed to keep any profit insular and controlled by a select group of people, all by design. LA 84 had massive investments in entities directly making LA less affordable, and specifically less affordable for families, children of color. Blackstone group is this, Blackstone is a massive real estate investment group, the biggest in the world, that is displacing people. And they were given 25 million by LA 84 Foundation. Oak Tree Capital is another one involved with LA 84, Goldman Sachs. These are all groups that were given massive amounts of money by LA 84. They co-opt social justice language, and they use youth sports to misdirect from massive financial and real estate transactions happening with no scrutiny. That's LA 84. And the CEO of LA 84 is a woman named Renata Simriel, who didn't get her degree in sports-related activities at all. She's actually a real estate agent, from USC, so another USC connection. So who loses? Workers. Workers absolutely lose. Despite the boosters' claims, the games historically have hurt workers, and they don't do anything to spur development in cities. To keep the costs down, the organizing committees, they always look to labor as the first source of cuts, not the IOC perks. They rely heavily on volunteer labor. They create demand for cheap short-term labor. This drives hostility towards organized labor. Of course, Olympic organizers will always award contracts to the groups that benefit them personally versus the benefits of local workers. So despite the claims that the Olympics will lead to increase in tourism, inward investment, and better economic prospects, they simply do not. Like these esoteric arenas, these multi-million-dollar arenas, like a shooting complex or a rowing center that they need to build, $10 million, $14 million. They're not needed after the games, and they lay in waste. They don't withstand the economies of these host cities. So you take Athens 2004 summer Athens, for example, 21 out of 22 of these stadiums, they're just laying, they're derelict. They're in a state of disrepair. You can go to each city. This is happening to so many of these cities. Boarded up. Where are the jobs there? The increase in jobs for the Greek population proved to be remarkably short term. And you can see this is city. Unemployment for residents of Stratford and Newham rose around the London game. Construction for the Sochi Games relied on cheap labor from about 16,000 workers from Serbia, Bosnia, and Central Asia. Many of these workers received no pay at all, significantly less than promised. 100 of them were deported afterwards. Dozens of workers in Rio died as a result of safety. And then bringing it back home, SoFi Stadium in Englewood, which we always talk about, 3 workers died building it. 40 have gotten COVID while building it. Governor Newsom, it was during the lockdown in April, seems like a million years ago. They deemed working, construction was shut down, and then the boosters and real estate developers on the project demanded Newsom, or they lobbied him to make it essential business. So SoFi Stadium became essential, and that they kept building it. And there's 40 COVID deaths and 40 COVID illnesses and 3 deaths. So yeah. Renters and tenants lose. People don't own their homes. People who do not own homes, they're displaced. This is a huge one. As gentrification accelerates, rents skyrocket. Officials use these games as a pretext just for luxury development for tourists and investors. This is already happening in LA, just immensely. We all know this. Olympic organizers have a long track record of using these games, including hotels, infrastructure, and stadia, to specifically target and demolish low-income and public housing and plunder. Promises are typically made to convert Olympic-related developments to affordable housing afterwards, which never materializes. So in 2004, for example, 8 years after the games in Atlanta, rents at a complex called Centennial Place had risen between 42 and 72%. This is incredibly common. Through Rio, over 77,000 people were displaced as a direct result of the games from the favelas, forcefully, violently. Advance of the 2008 Beijing Games, 1.5 million people evicted. Those who didn't move willingly, harassed, threatened, or stabbed. London Games, 1-bedroom apartment went from 230 pounds to 2,100 pounds. Homelessness in Salt Lake City increased by an estimated 50% during the games. You can see this over and over and over again in host cities, that houselessness, gentrification, tenants, renters are always
Rick would
some
have
of the
liked
first
to
to go.
hear
I
it.
can't believe that you brought that while we're having a stressful time.
I thought it would be a good idea. To
I don't
practice.
understand why you can't.
Maggie,
Like,
Maggie,
Come on,
Maggie,
these
can you
kids.
please mute Maggie?
Eric.
Yeah, so then, who's unhoused people are probably the biggest target when it comes to no visibility, poverty component of this clean city protocol. So this incentivizes organizers and local officials to criminalize and disappear them from sight. It's how LA dealt with the embarrassing problem of increasing homelessness in '84. We're already seeing this happen as a rationale for aggressive sweeps. For the Atlanta Games, For the Atlanta Games, some of the last remaining housing complexes were torn down in Atlanta. The Techwood homes, this is incredible. FDR's first public housing projects were torn down to build the Olympic Village in Atlanta. And where the Olympic Village was built, and then the IOC and the organizers built a VR museum so people could see what FDR built in the 40s. And they displaced all the residents there. Just an incredible fuck you to all the residents. That's kind of the Olympics in a nutshell. You displace low-income renters and build an Olympic village, but you make a virtual reality museum so people can see what it looked like beforehand. In leading up to the Rio Games, there were private security guards dispatched to clear the streets, and you took unhoused residents to shelters 50 miles outside the city. In Vancouver, red zones were created where Olympic events and venues and wealthy tourists were concentrated. Police were given additional power to arrest people on the spot. A state of exception was created in Rio, which pretty much meant security and military and police could do whatever they wanted with impunity. That's usually can happen during the games. Prior to the Berlin Games, police were authorized to arrest all Roma residents 2 weeks before the ceremony. 800 Roma residents were arrested and taken to concentration camps. Again, under the auspices of the Olympics, the Games. These are the same people, the same culture right now that still exists. In the lead up to the Atlanta Games, they passed a number of new ordinances targeting loitering, panhandling, attempted to pass an ordinance that allowed police to arrest people acting in an unusual manner, carrying a 2 to 6 month prison sentence, ramped up aggressive enforcement of existing anti-homelessness leading up to the games. There were 9,000 documented arrests of unhoused folks between 95 and 96, 400% increase in the lead up to the games. Atlanta introduced Homeward Bound, in which 25,000 unhoused residents were given a bus ticket out of the city if they promised to never return. In '84, City Council wanted to create drunk farms for the unhoused residents in LA, just to get them out of here. The Olympics are used as pretexts for all of the things that the cops and the government want to do to marginalized communities over and over and over again. There's more. Many of LA's practices of addressing homelessness were normalized. Police horses were deployed to Skid Row. The stuff is not pleasant, but it's real and it's a lot. And yeah, people really need to know this about the games, because I think people have this idea that they're just these kind of fun things you watch every 4 years, but mega events. And it's not just the Olympics, it's FIFA, it's the World Cup, it's the Super Bowl. Any event that's a national security event causes this. Yeah, so who loses? Immigrants. So in all host cities, sorry, I skipped over one here. Yeah. So sorry, who loses? Poor people, people of color, and indigenous people. So, you know, racial capitalism, Cedric Robinson, the great Black Marxist term, ensures that forces of gentrification, police militarization, labor exploitation, and more are always directed along economic and racial lines, always. Similarly, many of these other groups that are impacted negatively by the games are disproportionately poor, Black, brown, or indigenous. This is one of the reasons that certain Olympics have been held up as successful despite harming so many people. The '84 Olympics in LA, 2010 games in Vancouver, the 2012 games in London. The people who are most impacted are seen as necessarily or inevitably suffering, and violence against them is normalized. So, you know, our term of racial capitalism, it didn't break from the old order, but it rather evolved from it to produce a modern world system of racial capitalism. So, you know, it's dependent on all these forms of oppression. So it just evolved from these older ones. So capitalism is inextricably linked with these histories of racist expropriation, and it's only by tracking these connections between these, you know, changing modes of capitalism, worker exploitation, and racism that we can hope to address these modes of social injustice. So you need these people, these certain types of people to suffer, and their suffering is ignored, it's invisible. And so you can have events like this that are seen by the ruling class as successful because these people are just always, invisible to them. So they're a success and they're great. We reject that always. In the 7 years leading up to the 2016 games, police and security killed over 2.5 thousand people in the city of Rio alone. Mostly young black men, and police killings spiked in the months before the Olympics compared to the same period. In the lead up to the 1984 Summer Games, LA Police Chief Daryl Gates conducted Olympic sweeps in which thousands of young black and Latinx men were arrested. Indigenous activists protesting the expansion of the Sea to Sky Highway in Vancouver were jailed after refusing to apologize, including a number of elderly folks. One of them, Harriet Nanahi, died in prison. So as you can see, there's just incredible amounts of violence, of killing, of young black and brown men and indigenous men in the name of a 3-week party, essentially. It's horrible. Who loses? Immigrants. And this is particularly apt, as well as the last one right now, as there's news of ICE. I don't know if people saw this, but this morning, ICE is increasing its power as we speak. In all host cities, immigrants are a particular risk. So since 2002, the Olympics have been designated a national special security event, which mandates this unified command between local and state. There are these fusion centers that exist. There's one in LA. This is where we do a lot of work with Stop LAPD Spying, which is doing very, very critical work right now in regards to surveillance and the police state. So there's this, the 2028 games. This will be coordinated by the DHS, which includes ICE. The bid officials and local officials refuse to say when this goes into effect, which is really, really not good. We have to hold their feet to the fire. So immigrants are also renters and they're also exploited workers. There's a former NSA whistleblower in Utah from the 2002 games that said there was blanket indiscriminate surveillance of Salt Lake City during these games. So we know that they, for these mega events, just do whatever they want. And there was a whistleblower who said that. So sex workers also during these games, similar to unhoused residents, they're increasingly criminalized in the lead up to the game. Even in some cases where it's technically legalized or decriminalized, like in Rio, the policing still increases. So because of this heightened security and scrutiny, there's stigmatization around sex work. So people who were doing this work legally, now all these people come to town, their work is stigmatized and their lives become in danger. Also reports that the Olympics can drive up sex trafficking due to the perceived demand for sex work around the mega events. Small business owners, street vendors, local businesses, small businesses, informal economies, not only suffer financially, but often go under as a direct result of the Olympics. Corporate sponsors have monopoly of all businesses that take place, placing chokehold. Pyeongchang, business went down 80% during the 2018 Winter Games. 50 local shops closed. In '84, a number of local Black-owned businesses that went bankrupt as a result of the games sued the LA organizing committee and won. Yeah. They're always claiming that this is going to help tourism, it's going to help the economy. And I was just reading that tourism, there's a study that tourism actually goes down the year of the Olympics because people are so afraid of what's going to happen and people want to leave the city because they're afraid of all the Olympic tourists and they don't actually want to be there. So it's the opposite effect. Transit riders and planners lose. It's focus, they lose. Keeps poor residents out of sight by creating new transit routes that bypass non-gentrified areas, and they cut access from these areas to wealthy, gentrified areas. This is an area I don't know much about, but I want to learn more about. But this is very important. They talk about the Vermont Purple Line, I believe, the Crenshaw corridor. These are really important issues, but Olympic planners and politicians use transit oftentimes as a pretext for using the Olympics to say, oh, we're going to do a new bus line or a train line, but you have to look deeper at that and see where these are actually going and where they're going to carry people. As I said before, IOC gets their own road for the games. People with disabilities definitely lose, absolutely. It's essentially redesigned the city to maximize convenience for the wealthy tourists and the Olympic boosters shuttling between their hotels or Airbnbs, from which the Olympics have a 10-year contract with right now. In addition, the perimeters around the venues, this often means that accessibility routes are cut off for people with mobility impairment, wheelchairs in particular. The taxpayers lose. According to every single host city contract, the IOC is indemnified from being held responsible for any cost overrun, which means that, so usually split between local and state. So, which means taxpayers don't pay anything. So referred to as the taxpayer guarantee, and is the most frequent subject of the voter referendum. However, an Oxford study found that the Olympic Games go 176% over budget on average. So if the 2028 Summer Olympics go over budget, city taxpayers are responsible for up to 270 million. Then state taxpayers come to 540 million. Athletes lose. The Olympics are a breeding ground for abuse. There have been many cases of abuse within the Olympics. They're not paid. All of them face harsh punishment for criticizing their sports, questioning authority figures. There's a Rule 50 in the Olympic charters which says you cannot protest at the Olympics. We are not anti-sport. We are pro-athlete. We're in an interesting place right now where athletes might have more power, as we saw with the NBA and the Wildcat strike. They're ununionized. The volunteers are exploited. Even the famous athletes are exploited. There's the gymnast, Larry Nassar. There's a story of an East LA coach who was abusing his athletes. The IOC is doing nothing to change it. They have no interest in changing it. They're protecting their brand. This exploitation will continue until the games are completely abolished. We don't work with athletes because most athletes cannot materially change their position, and they're not in a position to. Sports can dilute social justice. If you look at sort of like the Black Lives Matter movement in the NBA, they're oftentimes co-opted by these organizations. We do talk to athletes, like Gwen Berry is one, and she's a strong advocate for this. It's tough because it's like, for example, like a skier living in Austria shouldn't be expected, to help someone over here. It's kind of tough to expect that. We aren't interested as sport being used as a pretext for oppression or for gentrification or for over-policing. We are interested in sport being used for joy and for community and for things like that. So that's the main gist of it, and just to kind of give you, I know that was a lot of information. Hopefully you have an idea of just like how horrible and how much harm and how dangerous the games are to cities and how their brand has been, brought to us in this positive light. So kind of what we're doing, and a few kind of things we're doing. Homes Not Hotels is one of our working groups, and no vacancies. So Homes Not Hotels was organizing around hotel-driven displacement in Hollywood. Since 2005, developers have been given, there's an LA Times report, $1 billion in incentives, in tax incentives from LA City Council. $1 billion to build hotels. LA is a tourism city. It's very, very real estate friendly. So we have a campaign that is saying we want homes, not hotels. We want housing, not hotels. And it was organized around the FIG development in Hollywood that was demolished and created a luxury hotel. And we are pivoting to work around converting hotels into permanent housing dovetailing with No Vacancy California, right now there are 70,000 vacant hotel rooms in Los Angeles, and we are working on getting those, trying to get those converted into housing. And Homes on Hotels has, we're working on a campaign called Locks on Our Blocks, which is a database on getting people to report illegal Airbnb hotel conversions. LA has a huge problem right now because LA City Council did not make a strong enough law, or did not make it so it's enforceable, allows landlords to convert their units into illegal Airbnb hotels, displacing renters, driving up rents, and further evicting people. So there are thousands of these illegal Airbnbs, which is contributing to the housing crisis. And we want to create a database that empowers people to say, hey, there's one right here, I see one here. So we're working on that right now. And again, Airbnb and the Olympics have a 10-year partnership. So Airbnb is absolutely a player in this, in creating and displacing people. So Homes on Hotels is a very important group we have. No Olympics anywhere. Again, we say no, hashtag no Olympics anywhere, not just LA, but all over the world, because this is an Olympic movement that is transnational. So cancel the Olympics. We say defund the police, defund the military, decommodify public goods, like housing and disaster relief. Our teaching series, which I've mentioned, which will be all online soon, hopefully in like a format that's easy to watch. And cool. And we do a lot of agitprop and propaganda, which I think is very solid. We have a street team that, if you're in, not sure what areas right now, but we're putting up a lot of agitprop at the moment, just all over the city. So be on the lookout for a bunch of big posters, places, and just wherever you see it, that's us, or not us. If there's any COINTELPRO on the line. Short and long form documentary projects we're working on. We're working on a long form doc. Journalism, writing, editing, research. Again, NOlympicsLA.com. We have a lot of analysis on there, and our extensive social media. And here's some quick links.
Eric, while you're maybe going through this, we could maybe start to have a few questions. Michael.
Yeah, totally.
We're kind of reaching near the end, and we want to allow people to question. There's some things that people have been posting in the chat.
Oh, okay.
If I could just, you can keep showing the slides, but if I could just.
Yeah, no, I'm done. I'm done here.
Okay. Anthony had asked if we could get a copy of the PowerPoint, because he works in housing justice and he'd like to share some of it with their group.
Yeah, that should be fine.
Okay, and maybe if you can send that to Darren, then we can share it with everyone.
Yeah, I'll do it afterwards for sure.
Okay, great. Okay, so do you want to, if you're done, then has everybody gotten the links? We can stop sharing screen and go to some questions.
I put them in the chat.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see.
You seem to be sharing your screen.
Do what, do what, Michael?
That's right. Yeah, go ahead. You have hands from Rick, Joe, Rose, Steve had his hand up, Brody, Carol Francis, and I can't raise my hand, but I wanted to make a comment.
Well, that's in participants, right? That's in participants.
Oh yeah, I'm participants. So I see Rick first.
Eric, thank you very much, because this is very interesting for me. I mean, sports has always been something that has defined like how I've seen myself, from being involved with baseball and
Speak up a little, Rick.
From a very young age, being involved in baseball and hearing from my dad about the displacement that happened in Chavez Ravine, you know. So there is a history of this in Los Angeles. There is a history of basically all of um, policing, the targeting youth that you talked about, that tends to go up around the Olympics, especially the ones that we had here in 39, I believe, and 84. And I want to ask you specifically about some of these other international events that happen around the world. You know, there's the Commonwealth Games, the Asian Games, World Series of different things like baseball. For loose chase, there's a Cricket World Series and stuff like that. And are any of those organizations doing more around justice efforts and economic equality efforts around those games than the Olympics are and the World Cup, to single out two very corrupt organizations that are not doing much at all to help those host cities when they do host events.
Thanks, Rick. Do you mean, what do you mean the organization, like what organizations do you mean are helping? Like which ones are you talking about? Like,
well, I wanted to see if you're finding if this is basically something that happens with every international sporting event that in the modern era, or if there are events like the Commonwealth Games, the Asian Games, like I talked about, where there is maybe more emphasis on working with the community for economic justice, the issues around housing for people in those host cities, or anything. Have you heard of anybody doing any groups, any sports organizations doing anything positive around the issues? Or are you finding that this is something that's endemic in every major sport around the world?
Yeah, I actually don't. I'm afraid I don't really know exactly. I found that I want to look more into like the Commonwealth Games and stuff like that. So I appreciate that. I know that any mega event, which is sort of defined as like in like a sort of awesome, huge gathering of people that necessitates, enormous security from the state. So FIFA is another sort of tangential of the Olympics, which is in a way just as corrupt, if not more, that have sort of been outed by the world in a way and seen as corrupt. But I'm not really sure about some of the other ones. I'd have to look into that more.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
I was gonna say just quickly that we may have to keep our questions really brief. We're running out of time and we have a few more people. So if you could be really short, quick questions. I think Joe, I see next.
Sure. Thank you. One of the big strengths, Eric, is your connection with many groups working on other issues that are permanent issues. And that means that your campaign counts for so much before 2028, during, after, whatever. That's great. I consider these kind of mega events, they're kind of like a drug for the political world. In 2015, there was an extra early morning meeting of the LA supervisors, and Secretary of Housing and Urban Development Castro spoke, and Supervisor Ridley Thomas from the South LA area, including Inglewood, said, we are losing ground on the housing issue and homelessness. And I checked with him later. He did mean physical ground being lost also. But then he went upstairs the same day, and at the general meeting of the supervisors, Mayor Butts came and they announced the success in setting up the Rams Stadium. And another supervisor just glowed with happiness because he said there was no public money involved. That's BS, of course. Tremendous public expense is inevitably involved in the stadia, traffic, all kinds of expenses. But it seemed irresistible, just like selling stadiums to communities. And it's like a flight into denial, backed up by armed force. And you brought out all those aspects, but I wanted to add this kind of drug effect that there is. It's hard to fight, but we got to do something on that level as well as the practical and financial. Any comments on that?
No, I love that. I'm going to use that. It is like a drug, and it begs the question: who wins, who loses, success for whom? I think that goes into the idea of, I always think of Cedric Robinson and racial capitalism. It necessitates suffering of an underclass, and that's what capitalism really is. And Mayor Butts is a huge player in this, and I really encourage everyone to check out Lennox Englewood Tenants Union and what's happening in Englewood and with SoFi Stadium, because that's really sort of a center point of what's happening with the Olympics right now. But thank you for that comment. That was really insightful.
Okay, and Rose, if you can be succinct as our time ticks down closer.
Unmute, Rose. Gotta unmute.
Yeah, sorry, I will try to be brief, but I have a lot of points. One is, on your PowerPoint, do change Theresa May's name to Boris Johnson. That's where he got his fame, his popularity, his cult following from being mayor of London, and that's why he's led Britain into this terrible Brexit. So please change the name. Second one is, you talked about the environment, but you should contact people in the valley. Look what they're considering doing at Lake Balboa, which is a big park that's used a lot by the community, and they're going to dig it out. They're going to have rafting up there. They're creating a whole river. And I think you'll find, if you start looking up the other side of the hill from Inglewood and places, you'll find a lot of the material there. Third thing, and I will be brief, I promise, I come from the part of London where the London Olympics were, and I actually visited, and I visited friends and family who still live in that area about a month after the Olympics. And the other side of it, the atmosphere was incredible. People smiled on each other on the subways, people stopped and talked to each other in the streets. The whole country was afire because of the Olympics, and because, being the host country, Britain had won so much. I mean, I'm not disputing anything you said, but it was incredible, the atmosphere and the effect it had on the whole country. Okay, I'll stop.
Okay, and I think we had one more, Carol Francis. I think you'll be our last one because we're out of time.
Okay, Eric, I loved your presentation. Thank you so much. I kept thinking, I don't want Olympics anywhere. And then at the end, you said we're fighting Olympics anywhere. Is there any kind of interaction between people? How international is the organizing, and what are people putting forth as maybe local substitutes for the Olympics, where they could still celebrate the athletes, but not bring in people from all over the world to pollute and militarize the cities internationally?
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you, Carol. So we have comrades from all over the world. We're in contact with people from, like I was saying, just from everywhere. And we would love, I mean, there were the socialist games in the 50s, I believe. There was the internet. There have been like substitutes. We can I can send you guys a link about that. I don't have it off the top of my head, but there have been attempts that were actually very successful made. I think 2 major games. There was the International Worker Games.
Wow.
Yeah, it's real. I can send it. Actually, I could find this YouTube link really fast. While you guys are talking, I'll send it. The Socialist Games, they were called, and that were enormous games that were put on that weren't predicated on profit, that were built on worker solidarity and athlete solidarity. We don't have plans now. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the capability of doing that, unfortunately. I mean, our campaign is no Olympic campaign. So there's this suffering around this and so much degradation. But we would love to see this happen. That's actually something I think about when I read in history, is that if we can, because I love sports. I mean, I play tennis and baseball. I love playing sports, but I don't want to see exploitation like it is now. So thank you for that question, and I hope to see that again one day. I'm going to find this link.
And then
If people wanted to stay a little bit longer, Ruby had her hand up for a while, and I had a comment, but I can't raise my hand in the chat because I'm the host.
okay, I think you've got a question already, Michael. So we might have to do that after we close, and maybe we can do Ruby quickly. I just wanted to make one quick point, which was when the Special Olympics came to LA and they were hosted at USC. Wow, was that a very different thing? And they were recruiting people to be fans in the stand to cheer for everybody. And the Olympians themselves were helping each other and cheering for everybody. And they made a whole village that was open to all the kids of the neighborhood, and they had a great time. And I think that's maybe more of the spirit we're looking
Yeah.
for. But Ruby, if you have a quick.
Yes, he gave us a lot of information, but tagging on to what Rose said and what you just said, with all this information, everything that you have, isn't there a way to turn it around and to have that money do the positive things to support a world coming together with the Olympics here in LA?
So
Can you come into the opposites, find people who work on that, to turn that into the opposites of what's happened in the past?
I really wish that were possible, because, I love sport and I love the camaraderie of sport and I love all these things, but reform, when we want to reform, the idea of reform, it legitimizes what's going on. And so we say no to reform. We have to abolish, because based on what I said, there has been so much harm done by this organization that we have to be able to separate the positives, which is like what Rose was saying. Like, it is positive when people come together and celebrate, medals and camaraderie. That's positive. We have to be able to separate out the harm to the unhoused, the harm to immigrants, the harm, the police state that's increased. They're intrexable. They are intertwined. So it is not possible to have both those things. So that's why we say no to reform, because it legitimizes all of these harmful things that are brought with a corrupt Olympic organization that's been doing this for many years. I hope that sort of answers your question.
I don't know why you said I had a question, because I didn't earlier. So I just want to say quickly.
Thought you did, Michael. Sorry.
Yeah, just quickly. I think the coming together is actually around the demand for no Olympics anywhere. They've sent delegations to Tokyo from here, and are in constant contact. They've been in touch with people from Rio, and locally, it is a really grassroots and well-informed effort. But it involves like the tenants union, the people in Inglewood, I like that connection to the Valley. I don't know about that, but it is bringing together people for Black Lives Matter, Stop LAPD Spying, HERE, and the unity is around the demand for no Olympics, because the Olympics themselves are transient, but the impact is permanent on all the people that suffer. The militarization in 84 here led directly to the rebellion in 92. And I think that, we really need to think about not having them. It's still possible to reverse course in that sense and prevent it from happening. I think what kind of city we want to live in the next 8 years and beyond is really what's up in this struggle.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Sorry about that. That was my mistake. And I think that's probably a good place to end. And with Eric's comments that about, alternative games that have happened in the past. So if we can shift our focus to that kind of, positive thing, because that's inevitably, I figure, where people are going to go is, so what then? So what are we supposed to do instead? And so I think that would help build, though I know you said we're not quite there yet, Eric. Did you have any final thought you wanted to say, Eric?
Yeah, just thanks for having me. This is an ongoing struggle and ongoing conversation. I think it's really important. I really appreciate the space and just the conversation and you guys having me. I know these are, tough times and these are not easy or pleasant things to necessarily talk about, but I think it's important to come from a place of just saying no, we don't want these things. That's where we come from NOlympics. It's an abolitionist group overall. And I really appreciate those last comments from Michael. I don't think I brought it up that that the '84 Olympics were responsible in many ways for the '92 uprisings. They led to that in many ways. I really appreciate you saying that. And yeah, so I would ask you guys to take this in and to maybe try and have some conversations with friends and with family and to really just think about some of these things and as you move on with your day. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Eric. And I think Carol Francis answered your question. Eric put the link in the chat for the alternative games that have happened. So
yeah,
check,
that's the link in there. Yeah.
So check those out for what might be possible.